Hello everyone and welcome to a new video on the Colombians Football Report. Today we will be going over all the games that took place on day 15 of the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Now before we get into the games that took place today, 83% of the viewers on my video are from people who are not subscribed to the channel. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so that I can continue to grow and make better content in the future. So now let's get to the games. And the first two games that took place today were Curacao versus the Ivory Coast and Ecuador versus Germany. Obviously, both games happening at the same hour because now we're in the final match day for each group. And Curacao, they went into this game with a small chance of still advancing to the next round, but they needed to win against the Ivory Coast. It was always going to be difficult because the Ivory Coast have a great team. This is a team that could seriously make a deep run in this World Cup. And unfortunately for Curacao, despite their best efforts and despite the fact that they actually played quite well today, they were still not able to get that win against the Ivory Coast. The Ivory Coast ended up winning 2-0. A very early defensive mistake resulted in Diomande crossing the ball to Nicolas Pepe, who was there to tap in the ball to give Ivory Coast the 1-0 lead. And they needed that because the win would secure them a spot in the next round. And then after that, Ivory Coast, they still had the majority of the possession and they still had some shots, but it was Curacao who had more shots in the game. Florennes almost scored an amazing goal from outside the box. He came very close. And Curacao were actually trying their hardest to get the game back level, but the Ivory Coast defense was very good. And on the few occasions where Fofana needed to respond in goal, he was able to do that. And in the second half, it was more of the same. Curacao, they didn't have the ball, but they were always going on counterattacks and they were always getting more shots than the Ivory Coast, but they just couldn't finish. I really like the way that the older Bakuna, the captain, he played very good today. And Thais Chong, he's always a very interesting player. But despite their best efforts, they just couldn't get the goal. And it was be the Ivory Coast who would score the next goal. After Sangare, he found himself in the box and he passed it to Nicolas Pepe, who was free with space, and he scored with his left foot. He scored a brace today. He was given the man of the match award, and he gave the Ivory Coast a 2-0 win that they needed to go to the next round. But despite Curacao getting eliminated, I still have to give them so much credit. They played in their first ever World Cup as the smallest country ever. Their fans were incredible. Some of their players had memorable performances. They scored their first ever World Cup goal against Germany and they kept a draw against Ecuador. So they truly had a very memorable run, and hopefully one day we could see Curacao return to the World Cup. And at the same time as the Curacao Ivory Coast game, Ecuador and Germany were playing in New Jersey. This was a must win game for Ecuador because after losing against the Ivory Coast on match day 1 and drawing to Curacao on match day 2, they needed to win this game to have any chance of advancing as one of the best third place teams. However, there was a huge problem, and that was the fact that before this game, Ecuador still hadn't scored a single goal in the tournament. And if they wanted to win this game, they needed to get their shooting boots. And the game did not get off to a good start at all. Florian Wirtz, he had the ball in Ecuador's box, and he passed it to Leroy Sané, and he finished it first time with his left foot in just the second minute of the game to give Germany the 1-0 lead. This was actually a pointless game for Germany because they already secured first place. They were just playing this game to complete with the schedule. But despite that, they were still trying their hardest. And it showed because they scored very early on. There were a lot of people saying that this goal should have been disallowed though because of a high boot. And I understand why people say that. But the more I look at the replay of that goal, the more it looks like Pedro Vite, he actually headed himself towards the boot rather than him getting kicked in the head, if that makes sense. So I actually think the referee made the right decision letting the goal stand. However, Ecuador were not discouraged because only 7 minutes after going 1-0 down, they finally scored their first goal in the World Cup. Angulo was in space on the left hand side outside the box, and he saw that he had a chance to shoot, so he shot from outside the box and it went in. It was relatively poor goalkeeping from Manuel Neuer, but it was still an amazing strike from Angulo, and that was the goal Ecuador needed. They needed that equalizer quick, and they got it thanks to that banker from Angulo. And Ecuador finally had their first goal in the tournament. So it was 1-1. And for the rest of that first half, Ecuador they kept trying to attack, but Germany were pretty solid, all things considered, and they would go on a lot of counterattacks. Granted, they couldn't make use of any of the counterattacks that they had, but it still felt like Germany they had the game under control in that first half. But in the second half, despite Germany getting to a fast start where they actually ended up getting a penalty that was later disallowed because of VAR, which was the correct decision, Ecuador they played much better in the second half. They started pressuring more. Their midfielder, Pedro Vite, had an amazing performance today. I would also say their two center backs, Pacho and Ordóñez, they were solid when Ecuador needed to stop any attacks from Germany in that second half. However, despite the fact that Ecuador were clearly playing better in that second half, they still couldn't get clear-cut chances. And that was because their striker was Ener Valencia, who is, unfortunately, he is washed. He is not the same player he was before. He again had another bad performance. He was poor in the last two games, and he was poor again today. He came off in the 64th minute for Kevin Rodriguez, who had a good season in the Belgian league and who is a bit more of a target man striker. So that was what Ecuador needed in that moment. And that substitution ended up being a stroke of genius from Becasese because the goal came from Kevin Rodriguez. It was a corner kick that was swung in. Kevin Rodriguez got his head on it, and before Manuel Neuer could try to catch the ball, Gonzalo Plata put out a foot and he poked the ball into the back of the net to give Ecuador a late 2-1 lead in the 77th minute. And the stadium went wild. There were a lot of Ecuadorian fans, which is expected because in the New York, New Jersey area, there's a lot of Ecuadorians. And after Ecuador scored, that's when they started to sit back again. And they're experts at sitting back because they have such a good defense. Caicedo was very solid today. Like I mentioned before, Pedro Rivite was very good when he went to the attack. He was very solid with his passes, but he was also very good when it came to pressing, trying to win the ball back. In my opinion, he was man of the match. I know FIFA gave the man of the match award to Angulo, but Pedro Rivite for me was the man of the match today. And despite Germany trying to create one last dangerous chance near the end, they just couldn't, and Ecuador managed to hold on to a crucial 2-1 win, a historic win for Ecuador. For the second time in their history, they have made it to the knockout stages of a World Cup. So now these are the standings in Group E after the end of match day 3. Germany obviously finished top. They were already top by the end of match day 2, so this last game against Ecuador wasn't that important for them, but they still put a very strong team out there. Ivory Coast, they finished equal on points with Germany, but due to inferior head-to-head record, they finished second. And Ecuador, they advanced to the knockout stages as one of the best third place teams. And meanwhile, Curacao, like I said, very honorable effort from them, but they finished last on 1 point. So who will every team face in the knockout stage? Well, Germany, as things stand right now, they will face Paraguay. And it looks very likely that they will face Paraguay. I would say there's like a 95% chance that it's going to end like that. So Germany versus Paraguay is basically confirmed, so expect that game to happen. Meanwhile, the Ivory Coast, they will play against the team that finishes second place in the group with France and Norway. So that France-Norway game is important because if Norway win, then Ivory Coast will play against France. If Norway draw or lose to France, then Ivory Coast will face Norway. And an Ivory Coast versus Norway game would be very entertaining to watch because the winner of that game will definitely end up being one of the dark horses of this World Cup. And Ecuador, meanwhile, they will face one of England or Mexico. Now, as things stand, they will face England, but that is most definitely going to change because the only way Ecuador faces England is if Scotland qualify as one of the best third place teams, but it looks very likely that Scotland are not going to qualify. So if that happens, that means Ecuador instead will face Mexico, and that could be a really toxic and really interesting game. Mexico versus Ecuador in the Estadio Azteca. That would be a 50-50 game in my opinion. That would be very entertaining to watch. So yeah, as things stand, they will face England, but it's highly unlikely that it's going to stay like that. So I would say it's like a 95% chance that Ecuador will face Mexico. Now we're going to Group F, and the two games that took place at the same time were Tunisia versus the Netherlands and Japan versus Sweden. The first game we'll talk about is Tunisia versus the Netherlands because we could just quickly talk about this game. It was a very easy game for the Netherlands. They look very good, much better than I expected. And Tunisia, meanwhile, I think they are definitely one of the candidates to be the worst team in the World Cup. They were awful in every game. They got battered by all of their opponents in every game. And I mean, this game could have ended like 4-1 or 5-1 in favor of the Netherlands, but they didn't try as hard as they could have done. And in just 7 minutes, the Netherlands were already winning 2-0. Tunisia scored a ridiculous own goal. And then just a few minutes later, Robbie, he scored a volley. Great goal from him. He has 3 goals in 2 games as a starter. So I feel like he could be the main man for the Netherlands in this World Cup. And for the rest of that first half, Netherlands, they controlled the game. They had more shots. And Tunisia, I think they had a chance here and there, but nothing too concrete. Then in the second half, they managed to score thanks to a brilliant header from Mastuari, great cross from Hannibal, but it didn't matter because just 8 minutes later, Van Hecke, he would give the Netherlands the 3-1 win. After his header from a corner kick was kind of deflected in, it could have easily gone down as an own goal, but it looks like FIFA instead they're happy to give Van Hecke the credit for the goal. And yeah, the Netherlands, they're just clearly a much better team than Tunisia. It felt like even with their players not even playing at 100%, they still easily won this game. And Tunisia, for me, they are the worst team in the World Cup. Let me know what you think of that take, but I struggle to see a team worse than Tunisia at this World Cup. I mean, even the Czech Republic at least got a draw. Tunisia went home with 0 points and they played awful in every single game. Meanwhile, like I mentioned, the Netherlands, they look much better than I expected. This is a team that could go far in this tournament. And now it's time to talk about Japan versus Sweden, which was taking place at the same time. Now, the first half of this game was pretty boring, all things considered, but Japan were clearly still the better team. They had more possession, they had more shots, nothing too dangerous, but still, they were clearly the better team. But in the second half, the game definitely sprung into life. It was a lot more entertaining, and Japan, they kept attacking, and eventually they took their deserved lead when Maeda finished off a brilliant passing move. The Japanese players were just passing the ball between each other, and then Risu Doan puts in a brilliant through pass to Maeda so that he could finish. Brilliant goal. This Japanese team, they play beautiful football, and Japan, they truly deserve that lead because while they didn't have their best game ever in the first half, and they didn't have the most dangerous of chances, they still had more chances, and they still had more possession, and they still looked like they wanted to win more than Sweden. So that was a deserved lead. But only 6 minutes after that, kind of against the run of play, Anthony Alanga scored a banger of a goal. Now it is true Suzuki could have done a bit better on that goal, but Alanga with his weaker left foot, he cut inside and from just outside the box from a relatively difficult angle, he managed to curl it into the corner of the net and Sweden were back level. And that goal seemed to change something in the game because Sweden they started to play better. I guess Sweden they realized that they had a chance to steal second place from Japan because now they started to have more momentum. Even after the water break, they still had that momentum. And Suzuki had to make some good saves. There was one that I remember that was brilliant from him. So he kind of made up for the fact that he made a very small mistake in the Alanga goal because he could have done better for that goal, but he still made some brilliant saves to make up for it. And despite a late onslaught from Sweden, Japan they still held on to a very exciting 1-1 draw. At least the second half was exciting, but there is still some bad news for both teams because Hein in Sweden he got injured. He came off in the first half, and Itakura in Japan, he also got injured. He came off in the first half as well. I think Heinz's injury looks way more serious though. Like that looks like an injury that could leave him out for the rest of the tournament. Hopefully I'm wrong. But yeah, this draw means that Japan were not able to get first place, but it still finished second. And Sweden, with this draw, finished with 4 points in third place, which meant that they qualified as one of the best third place teams. So I think all things considered, the Swedish can still be very happy with the way they played today and the fact that they're now in the knockout stages. So this is how the group ended. The Netherlands with 7 points, Japan with 5, Sweden with 4, and Tunisia, for me the worst team in the tournament, on 0 points with a negative 10 goal difference. Now, the reality is that no matter where you finished in this group, you were always going to get a tough opponent. Because despite the Netherlands playing very well in this group and finishing top with a +6 goal difference, their next opponent in the round of 32 is Morocco. In my opinion, I think the Netherlands have been slightly better than Morocco in this tournament, so I think they will be slight favorites. But it still doesn't change the fact that that's a very hard game. Like, this is the type of game you would expect in the round of 16 or the quarterfinal, not a game that you would expect to see in the round of 32. So it will be very fun to watch that game. Meanwhile, Japan, they finished second, and their reward for finishing second is Brazil, which is going to be another very fun game to watch. Again, like I mentioned with the Netherlands and Morocco, Japan and Brazil is a game that you would expect in the round of 16 or in the quarterfinals. It's not a game you would expect in the round of 32. So these are two big clashes very early on. It will be very interesting to see how both games end. And meanwhile, Sweden, they have qualified as one of the best third place teams thanks to having 4 points. And according to the majority of the simulations, it looks very, very likely that Sweden will face either France or Norway. It just depends on who finishes first in that specific group. But it's very likely it will be France because I do think France will beat Norway. So expect that game to be between Sweden and France. And that's also a good game, to be fair. Maybe not the level as the other two games that we just talked about, Netherlands, Morocco, and Japan, Brazil, because I still think France will still be clear favorites over Sweden. But Sweden are definitely capable of giving France a hard time if France are not careful. And now I'm going to talk about Group D. And the two games that took place at the same time today were Turkey versus the United States and Paraguay versus Australia. Now, first, we're going to talk about Turkey and the United States. And this game was a glorified friendly match. And the reason I say this is because the United States already secured first place, while Turkey already secured elimination from the tournament in last place. So these two teams were just playing just to complete the calendar. The United States had a fully rotated team. Well, besides McKennie, who was the only regular starter who was playing today, he was the captain. But everyone else, they're players that you would see on the bench for the United States. Meanwhile, Turkey, they still went with a strong team. They wanted to at least get a result in their last World Cup game, and they would end up doing that because they managed to beat the United States 3-2 in California. But it was the United States who got the lead in this game. After a corner kick found Trusty, who was at the back post, he managed to control it and then he just smashed the ball into the back of the net. Great goal from the center back. He scored his first ever international goal and he did it at the World Cup. However, despite the United States taking the lead, it was Turkey who managed to tie. Arda Güler, after some brilliant play between him and Yilmaz, there was a bit of a mix-up in the defense, but still, Güler, he found himself in space inside the box and he managed to finish past Matt Turner and he scored Turkey's first World Cup goal in 2026. So this means that every single team has scored a goal besides Panama. Panama are the last team who has still yet to score a goal. We have to see if they can do it against England in a few days. But Turkey, they finally scored their first World Cup goal in 24 years, and it was Arda Güler who did it. And the United States, they tried to play better. They tried to stamp their authority, but Turkey, they had nothing to lose. They were just playing this game for fun, and it clearly showed because for once they weren't playing with nerves. They were actually playing like a team. They were actually attacking well, which is something they didn't do in the last two games. But again, after some good play from Koshu and Yilmaz, it resulted in a goal for Yilmaz, and Turkey had a 2-1 lead against the United States B team. And it was probably well deserved. However, in the second half, the United States started off as the better team, and they went pressuring to look for that equalizer, and they would get it thanks to a brilliant strike from Berhalter. I don't remember if it was outside the box or just inside the box, but it was a brilliant strike. There was nothing the goalkeeper could do about it. And he tied it 2-2. And then the United States, they brought on Christian Pulisic so that he could get some rhythm after he recovers from his small injury that he had. And the United States, they started to play better at times. There was one moment that came really close to ending as a goal. Christian Pulisic, his shot was kind of scuffed, but it still forced the goalkeeper Kakir to make a save onto the post, and it felt like the United States were trying a bit more, but they just couldn't finish their chances. And then right in the 8th minute of stoppage time, when the game was literally just about to finish, after a series of rebounds and crosses, the ball eventually found its way to Ayan, who was free with space, and he managed to tap the ball in to give Turkey a 3-2 win right at the end. They celebrated that goal like they qualified for the next round, but clearly that obviously didn't happen because they were already eliminated. But it was still a big moment for Turkey, and still a big moment for Ayat for him to score a last minute winner in a World Cup. That's the type of stuff that everyone dreams of doing as a child. So Turkey, they won 3-2, but this game wasn't that important because, like I said, Turkey, they were already last place no matter what happened today, and the United States were already first place no matter what happened today. So I think, if anything, the United States will be happy that all of their starters are well rested. They don't have any players suspended, and Christian Pulisic is back from injury and back with some rhythm. And now the last game that we're going to talk about is Paraguay versus Australia. And I'm not going to talk about this game too much because for me, this was the worst game in the tournament. It was very, very dull to watch. It felt like the disgrace of Jihan Part 2. And the reason I say this is because both teams knew that if they drew, they would be advancing. Australia are officially in the round of 32. Paraguay officially have not done it yet, but they have like a 99% chance of doing it. So expect by the end of tomorrow, Paraguay will be confirmed as one of the teams in the round of 32. But man, that was a very dull watch. The only player that I really want to give any credit to was Jordan Boss because on that right hand side, he looked very good. He was dribbling past players. He had one of the most dangerous chances in the game. And I think in general, Australia were probably the slightly better team. They had more shots and they had more slightly dangerous chances, but still nothing like truly clear cut. And I mean, I guess Paraguay's defense defended well. Their goalkeeper Orlando Hill, he was very solid. But yeah, it was a dull watch. And Cecil couldn't do much. You could still tell he has that quality. You could still tell that he is a player who's able to dribble past players. But he just didn't have the type of game that you would expect from him. And yeah, it was a very dull watch. But I am disappointed in Paraguay. I would have expected more from them. Because even though it is true the draw will help both teams advance to the next round, the team that finishes second in this group gets a much easier game than the team that finishes third. So I would have expected Paraguay to try harder so that they could get the easier game. But no, the manager Gustavo Alfaro, he started with a five at the back and he made some defensive changes. Players like Caballero, Sanabria, and Ramon Sosa, they never even came on, which I think is a huge shame. I feel like those players, they should have came on today, but it is what it is. Let's see if that decision to not try hard in this game so that Paraguay could face Germany instead of facing Iran or New Zealand actually pays off for Paraguay. So this is what the group looks like now. Like I mentioned, the United States were already guaranteed first, Turkey already guaranteed last, but Turkey, they still got that win as a bit of a consolation for their fans. And the United States, they're well rested now for their next game, which has already been confirmed. They will face Bosnia and Herzegovina. A very winnable game for the United States. They will be favorites for it, but Bosnia are definitely a team that can cause any other team problems on a good day. And meanwhile, like I mentioned, Australia and Paraguay, they should be through to the next round. I mean, Australia have already done it. Paraguay have a 99% chance of doing it, so it's basically done for them. And Australia will face the team that finishes second in Belgium's group. So that could be Belgium, New Zealand, Iran, or Egypt. We still don't know, but I think those are all favorable games for Australia, which is why I'm surprised Paraguay didn't try harder to try to finish second place. because instead of facing one of those teams, which would have been much easier, now Paraguay, they have to face Germany. Still not confirmed yet, but there's like a 95% chance that it will be Germany. But to be fair, Paraguay, I do think they do better in games where they're expected to sit back and counter than in games where they are expected to dominate. So maybe they could give Germany a shock. We just have to wait and see. But yeah, that's going to do it for day 15 of the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like I mentioned earlier. And I have nothing more to say, and have a good night, everyone.